is Fiona Weldon, and I certainly have thoroughly enjoyed the day. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist, and I've been most interested and delighted to be here to hear such rich kind of information coming from such an amazing group of speakers. And I was certainly bursting with questions as I was listening to all the speakers. I just wanted to introduce two additional panel members. First of all, we have Dr. Louise Rooney, who's a criminologist working as a postdoc fellow in UCD School of Medicine. She's a mixed method researcher with over 5 years' experience in conducting evidence-based research in both the criminal justice and the health sector. Dr. Rooney's current projects include an investigation of adolescent pathways to crisis mental health assessment and care, from Garda Contact to Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Services. It's quite a long title, got there. It covers a lot. And the other project is from Garda Contact to Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Services, the other project is drug and alcohol misuse amongst probationers. And I think she's also lectured on numerous programmes in UCD, Maynooth and the Technological University of Dublin. And then we have Mairead Deavy, who is a practicing barrister. Mairead is just here, second in from my left here. She was called to the Irish Bar in 2012. She predominantly works in criminal practice encompassing both Dublin and South East circuits. She works in criminal justice, which regularly obviously brings her into contact with neurodiverse individuals, and the impact of this that this has in their lives, and certainly kind of goes undetected. And certainly, maybe before we start, and just my own kind of reflections of the day, you know, in my own work, I'm increasingly being asked to go over interview tapes that Gardaí have carried out with perhaps young offenders, and increasingly being asked the question, what do you think about the process here? This person either was already known about, and even in cases where it's already known that the person has perhaps autism or intellectual disability. And you can see an interview, for example, one relatively recent case where somebody's saying, did you understand the legal caution? Did you? And the person is sitting there going, yeah, I did, yeah. And then the interview continues, and I've been asked to comment on what's the consent around this interview like for this person? How does that meet with the criteria around consent to this interview? And it's very, very clear, you know, a clinical interview with people with autism, people with intellectual disabilities, they learn to try to mask their difficulties. So they learn to say, yeah, I get it, when they don't. And certainly, you know, not to mention that most people wouldn't necessarily get what a legal caution would mean, you know, whether they had neurodiverse issues or not. So I was certainly very interested to hear that piece, and certainly in my own work as well, with kind of sentencing and pre-trial assessments and things, I'm still noticing that people are also going undetected in terms of these diagnoses. So I've had a man recently, sexual offender, who was undiagnosed with Asperger's all his life, and 56 or so years old. So it's certainly still out there, it's still happening that people are not being diagnosed, and the impact of that on their lives is huge. So yeah, I think I was certainly very engrossed in all of the information that I've heard today, so I wanted to thank the speakers for that. And yeah, so questions, I don't know how we're going to manage the questions. Is there a microphone going around, or are we just going to maybe do it by eye maybe? But maybe to begin with reflections, anybody have a particular question to ask any of the panel members? Yes, middle.
I was just struck with a lot of talk throughout all the presentations today around the young people and adults' difficulties with communication, around understanding the process, being able to articulate their difficulties with language processing, with social interaction, and it was lovely to hear mention of speech and language therapists on 2 occasions, and that's what we are. I'm just wondering what people think about the voice of the profession of speech and language therapy at the table in relation to criminal justice. And I know perhaps in the UK, the Royal College is probably far more involved, maybe with a higher profile in this, but I know certainly in Ireland, the Irish Association of Speech and Language Therapists is very, very keen to be part of initiatives and would lobby year on year in the budget for funding to be involved in criminal justice, and it just hasn't happened yet. So
Well, I know with the work we've done so far, we've engaged speech and language therapists on an individual basis, but we have been in contact with the organisation to say we're doing that, we're not undermining any arrangements we're putting in place with them, because I certainly think once somebody's in custody or we're questioning, we go back to the use of intermediaries, so it's critical that the professionals are involved.
So, I mean, certainly, and even on that, I mean, I was certainly madly writing down people's email addresses saying, I must actually, write to that person, get connected with that person, and just kind of get myself involved. So similarly, obviously, you guys are doing that at a big level already, but yeah, it's very important.
I certainly would love to see speech and language therapists as intermediaries in court, and it would make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Sarah,
Yeah.
Service and making aware we're opening the hospital later this year. Certainly, speech and language therapy has been something very much on the agenda around workforce planning in that new service. I know there's a kind of a small area around speech and language therapy and mental health, but relatively, and I'm moving into forensic technology, so it's something that's actually quite new for the near future. So that's a pathway, and I think, to the system in mental health.
Also, just to mention, I spoke earlier about the Learning Disability Professional Senate, which is very much multi-professional, and there is a strong but clear presence around speech and language therapy, co-chair along with psychiatry. But it's really important for us to make sure we've got all the different professions, and we think about art therapy, but all of the different relationships that clients have with us.
Okay, any other questions? Comments or thoughts, reflections?
Yes. I think it's interesting saying Bailey said there in terms of the systems not working together. And I think in Ireland we tend to follow the pattern of working in silos. Even myself and my colleague Karen have done a bit of training with the guards recently, and the guards who are doing the training weren't aware of the resources that you have developed. And you think, how is that even possible?
It only happened in the last 2 or 3 weeks, just to be they only launched their own diversion strategy.
We were laughing as well because we were saying, there's resources on the Garda portal about what autism is and things like that. They're going, is there? And we're, how do we know about it and you don't? Yeah. But it's this idea of all of these systems working independently and not communicating particularly well together. And essentially, we kind of feed into that perpetuation of kind of the systemic failures that we're seeing. So I just thought it was particularly interesting to hear your perspective on kind of general systemic stuff.
When we were in with them, again at the round table discussion last year, like they would say, if you ask them what they're doing about this on a national level, they don't have an answer. But they know at a community level there's a lot of things going on, and it's trying to bring that information together and maybe streamline some projects that you could roll out across the country, capacity building within communities. And then when we look at the use of intermediaries, like we're looking at their new restructuring and how they're bringing new divisions, geographically how that crosses over with the circuit and district courts, and seeing how we could develop teams, community response teams, for example. So we're looking at what's going on in other jurisdictions as well, and seeing what's the best way forward. So I know in the new year we hope to hold another roundtable discussion just to take that a step further and see how we can broaden it out. And I know the one particular project we were working on in the Guard is going to be rolled out across the country in relation to diversity and inclusion. And that's just one piece of it. The other piece of training, again, is tailored differently because it's around first encounters. So they're developing their own, I think 2019 to 2021. So it's not going to happen overnight, but they're very keen to work with us. And while we can go at base level, that's when we bring in the health professionals as the training. There's different levels and there's different audiences. And again, adapting that to the other criminal justice professionals as well. So that would be the idea. But we're just facilitating that and trying to manage it. So, and then we will be able to gather that information. So we'll have a sense of how it's all progressing as well.
Yeah, I have to say, as a lawyer in the criminal justice system, I find it extremely frustrating because, like, I think the majority of people in the room here are sort of involved in probation services, other parts of the sort of therapeutic end of it. But short of the guards, actually, your lawyer is the first point of contact that somebody is going to have in the criminal justice system. And if you don't have a diagnosis of ADHD and your lawyer, or autism, and your lawyer has no idea what that is and doesn't know how to look out for it, you're never actually going to get onto all of these next steps. And it's an area that I'm very interested in and have a lot of knowledge in because, full disclosure, I actually have it myself. But most of my colleagues would have no idea, and I actually had a conversation with somebody yesterday when I told them that I was speaking at this, where they said, oh, there's a lot of people who would actually say ADHD isn't real, and I just kind of went, but that is kind of the perception out there, and I would just love to see more of all of you training the lawyers and the judges and the police, because we are kind of the first line for people who aren't diagnosed. And we can't diagnose, but we can certainly recognise. And I think we can also have a really important impact in the way that we deal with people. And it's been really heartening to see all of the talk about communication, because I think that there can be a therapeutic aspect to justice as well. We aren't therapists, but the way that you deal with an individual who, for example, if they have ADHD and they don't know, not only do they have ADHD, but they have an incredible amount of shame heaped on top of that from a life lived feeling misunderstood. And I just think we're failing people as, sort of lawyers and so on by not being able to relate with them. And I think we need a lot of training in communication and empathy and that sort of thing. And I had none of that. I learned about the law, but I didn't learn about the people side of it. And it's probably only because it's affected me personally that I have such an interest in it. So.
Thanks very much for that, Ryan. It's lovely to hear that, because actually it's a really good, because if we looked at everybody in the room, and kind of said, well, what are the people, you remember the pictures of the video earlier, what is neurodiversity? It's this. It's probably everybody in the room would have either a family member or some aspect of their own lived experience that those issues, those experiences will be touched on. So it's lovely to hear that from you.
Yeah, and it's also that strengths-based thing, isn't it? Because, we've kind of been talking today and it's all a bit doom and gloom, but like, I'm somebody with ADHD who didn't find out about it till 27, who has done okay. And, but I have no doubt that if I'd grown up in a different family, in a different socioeconomic background, it could have been a very different story. So, that's where I think the therapeutic piece comes in, that every time you sit down with the client, you have an opportunity to say, haven't you done really well to get this far, and your criminal behaviour is reducing, and it sounds like a small thing, but it might be the only kind word they've had. So, I think we need to look at strengths as well as weaknesses.
Yeah, I was just going to echo that, Mairead, and thank you very much for speaking. The focus of today was neurodiversity in the criminal justice system, and obviously that does imply we're looking at the difficulties that the young people or the older people have ended up in, but there's the huge flip side about all the positive attributes and skill sets, and how, societies are far more than the sum of the parts. And in fact, in UCD, one of the things we're trying to develop, Dr. Gavin and myself and others, following on from Stanford University, is creating UCD as a neurodiverse environment and actually celebrating the richness of neurodiversity and moving that on into many of the Googles, the Facebooks, where what is a difficulty in a criminal area and dealing with, judiciary or being investigated or being interviewed, actually is a skill set in another setting. And it's just about how each of us are aware of our own strengths and weaknesses and how to modify them to the situation. Obviously, you've done that wonderfully. Many other people have in the audience that, as you say, Fiona, have their own neurodiversities that may not be so apparent. And that goes back to, who had the picture, was it? Yeah, in your video, the hidden disabilities. And maybe we should celebrate them an awful lot more.
Yes. Can I ask, if a lawyer or a judge suspects that somebody might have ADHD or autism or a learning disability and but they don't have a diagnosis, how do they arrange that? Can they refer somebody for assessment?
Yeah, well, I feel I probably am guilty of a lot of sort of armchair sort of psychoanalyzing people, but I will always say to a solicitor, I think there might be an underlying issue there. I really think that we should get a pre-sentence report. But I do sometimes kind of wonder, sort of from an ethical point of view, how far I can go, in terms of identifying.
How do you arrange a pre-sentence report?
So typically you would just say to the judge that you feel that there may be some issues that need to be explored and what they give time, and I think Judge O'Connor is right that in that circumstance normally the court will kind of be willing to postpone sentencing, and then you would just ask your solicitor to write to a psychologist. But a problem, like I had a case recently where I had researched a number of psychologists and psychiatrists for a solicitor, and I don't really know what happened, but in the end we ended up with the psychotherapist report, and it's nothing at all against psychotherapists, they're absolutely amazing, but when it comes to sentencing, actually the court is familiar with the language of the DSM, they are familiar with the labels as they are, and this report was talking a lot about attachment theory and so on and so forth, and it really, that person had no previous convictions. It was quite a serious first offence, but they ended up going to prison for 2 months, and I just couldn't sleep because I was so worried about what was going to happen to them in there. I really suspected they had ADHD, and I just was very worried that,
And does the court fund that?
Yeah, well, it's not so much as the court that funds it. It comes out of legal aid, really, doesn't it? It's government funded.
So it has to be arranged privately, and funding has to be offered.
If they have legal aid, then what you say to the court is, will you extend the legal aid sort of grant to cover a sentence report, and they will. If it's a private individual, then they would have to cover it. But overwhelmingly, I think criminal law tends to be criminal legal aid. So they're always very willing. But I would say as well, an issue I have encountered a few times is I'll be trying to get a probation report where I think that they're because I think there's somebody said, I think it was you were saying earlier, one of the barristers was saying one of the big problems is we don't have enough time with clients. I meet clients that I get their file and then I meet them 10 minutes later for 10 minutes, and do you have alcohol issues? No. Do you have drug addiction? No. But just because they don't have some sort of obvious dependency issue doesn't mean actually that there isn't a lot of trauma or ADHD or something underneath. And I've come up against barriers with judges who will sort of say the probation services are under a lot of stress, and I know they are. So if you can't tell me that there's a mental illness or an addiction problem, I'm not going to grant probation. And I think that's really wrong. There's not a whole lot I can do in that scenario, I'm bound. So
if I could, sorry, just could I bring in perhaps Dr. Rooney there on that, because just in terms of access to care and pathways, I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I think, it's when you're saying that by the time that you get people, they've been charged, where the research myself and FIONA are doing is looking kind of a lot earlier down in the pathway, and talking about the guards as first responders, kind of identifying and, recognising that there's an issue. We're particularly interested at looking at kind of crisis situations. So people who are possibly adolescents who need to have a psych assessment, who are brought into custody, the GP comes, they say that they need a psych assessment, and what happens then. But I suppose when it's a more acute mental health issue, you can see it a lot better. We're talking about neurodiversity, which goes underneath the radar, and something that's coming through in the interviews, because we have been asking about that as well with some of the guards. Have you had any training in more kind of overt symptoms of mental health issues and recognising it, but then the more subtleties of, say, somebody who has ADHD or somebody who has Asperger's or autism, and where some of their behaviours might be found to be quite provocative or to worsen the situation that they're in. And some of the younger Gardaí who were taken in the last intake of training from 2015, they have got some training, but the kind of veterans who are in the guards haven't really had any. And certainly I've only conducted a few interviews at this stage, we're still early doors, but the feeling that I'm getting is that they are really open to it and they really need it and they recognise that it's important, because they'll be the first people to say, listen, I'm not a healthcare professional, but I'm not a monster either. You know, I would hate to think that I was mistreating somebody or was missing something, and we can't we can't blame the guards as first responders, like you said, if it's not on their radar, and if they don't have the information, then how can they do the jobs that they need to do? And more the guards are being called out to situations involving people with mental health, and it really is crucial that they have some level of training to ensure that people are being treated appropriately.
I just add, I mean, there's an awful lot of pressure on us all as professionals and the time constraints that we all work within. Actually, we've all got a duty of care. We've all got our own accountability and our professional responsibility. So when you sense that there's something that needs investigating further, you've got your duty bound to follow that up, because, you know, the possibility or the potential for somebody going down the wrong route, completely the wrong route, is just, you know, it's too bad to contemplate, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Go ahead. I think that thanks, by the way, to all the speakers from the organisers, just because you have been conference, but and I work in a child psychiatry service, but it seems to me that people have talked a lot today about undetected neurodiversity and people going under the radar. And one of the places where children spend most of their time is in school. And so what we have is child psychiatry services that are quite pressured, so there are wait times and people are probably going to be quite selective about who they refer. But first of all, somebody has to be alarmed or to actually to conceive of the child's behaviour as potentially being related to ADHD or autism or needing a psych assessment. So I think that we really should be looking at teachers being able to pick up on these children. And in Ireland currently, teachers aren't taught in their training anything about child development or child mental health. It's not part of their training. And there are issues around that for teachers. I think there's a certain anxiety about stepping outside of the role, or by taking it into their training, that they're somehow then taking on a duty of care in some way, or that in some way expanding beyond their kind of professional role or their professional training. So I think there are worries and anxieties about that, but I think we should try and get beyond that. Sue in her talk spoke about training people up in the voluntary sector, but I really do think there's never going to be enough experts to look at every single case, and some capacity to triage and maybe highlight those people who do need to be fast-tracked through the system. That would be great. But there are lots of things that I think teachers can be doing which is going to help kids to manage better anyway, and we can see that increasingly. But even, within the system here in Ireland, educational psychologists, those assessments are like gold dust. It's so difficult to get an education psychology assessment. Special needs assistants in classes, they have very little specialist training actually. So it seems to me that, investment in that is something that should happen, or at least that if not investing more money or resources, that we should be thinking a bit more about the type of training and education the teachers are getting.
It's the perfect time to do this thinking, because I have to take my hats off to the people who job share the mental health role in the Department of Health. They've bit the bullet with this and they've managed to get the money. We've got 26 trailblazer sites across England where we're putting mental health support teams that link across to CAMS into schools. We're getting a mental health lead teacher, not so they feel overburdened because they're given time to do it. We're putting evidence-based interventions in, it's been tracked, and the findings will start rolling out at the end of next year. So you won't have to, there is no difference. Everything you said is absolutely spot on, but you won't have to reinvent the wheel, and I think it will be a beautiful project almost there on the plate for you to pick up and use. And also we have got over, and there will now be teaching on normal and abnormal element in all teacher training. We've won that battle. We've been at that for 3 years and we got it in the long-term plan. So please take that as it rolls out, because it's a really nice gift.
What's the name of the project?
It's a trailblazer site, so it follows. All you need to look at is the children's green paper and everything that follows from it. And it's early doors. We've just got all the trailblazer sites going. We've insisted they cover geographical areas across England. They can't just do them all in London. Sorry, my bias, that just slipped out. And all sorts of schools. So they can't exclude. And we're pushing for another one. We'll actually look at this on children who are home tutored, because they're another missed, which you get in childcare legislation, a very missed and misunderstood group. So it's a bit of genuine good news. The only other comment I'd make is everything you've said today is right for a new sort of science for evaluation. I haven't got time to explain it. It's called syndemics, but it's how you scale up local community, public agency products, which are characterised by complexity. And complexity has been something everybody keeps saying. But we've found a methodology where you can do this. And one of the groups it's identified you can do it in is offenders and mental health. So this is an emerging science, and again, we've got a big bid in at the moment. If we get it, we'll be able to see how it works. And this would always bring everything you've been talking about together. So nobody could diss you at the end and say, well, you said it worked, but you haven't really shown it and you haven't scaled it. You know, you get the doubting Thomas's prevention doesn't work. And this is probably the only form of science, and it's modelling health, social care, education, justice models for intervention. So again, that's another hopeful gift that we can bring.
Thank you. So, question?
Yeah, sorry, and thank you to all the speakers on a very informative day. Dennis Murray reminded me I work with the Adolescent Addiction Service and Family Therapists. And I suppose the statistics from this morning is not surprising for me, because within our service too, and over the past 23 years, on average 60% of young people have a prior contact or diagnosis within CAMS. And either they may be still currently attending or have dropped out or whatever. And so I think in terms of Sue's presentation and in focusing on protection, prevention and provision, and I suppose all of those areas need to be looked at, because we need to protect, and I think parents need to be informed. So I think working with parents, working with families and communities is very important, because you're dealing with a high-risk group. And the fact that young people's behaviour may morph into substance use or other activity at a later stage in adolescence, people need to be prepared for that and to be planning for it. But also, I suppose if you look at last Christmas, and I worked with prisoners and ex-prisoners for 7 years before that in a project, and you would have been mired at in September to December to get out of prison and thinking of their Christmas clothes and that. But this last year, for the first time, young people in Overstown chose not to go home to their communities for Christmas. None of the young people who were in understood it chose to go home at Christmas time. And that says an awful lot about what young people are, once they experience a level of containment and support, then they become aware of the absence of that within their families and the communities, and the inability of the communities to sustain them and to provide for them. So we have to be looking at that, because if you're providing then at one level, you have to make sure there's a continuum of care.
Okay, we might have time for maybe one, maybe two quick questions.
Thanks very much. Kieran Moore's my name. I'm a paediatric psychiatrist. Just 2 quick points, or 3 quick points. Firstly, thank you. It's really good to talk about it, because I think it's bringing it up, and the more we talk about it, the better. Secondly, in terms of the so-called CAMS, or the so-called experts in terms of making diagnosis, we have 2 problems. I'm sorry to talk about problems, but they're really fixed. One is that a lot of, quite a significant number of consultant paediatric psychiatrists who are supposed to be experts are not trained, or not higher trained, because our health service executive management willfully employs people who aren't higher trained, and that's a problem. And secondly, and I'm saying this as a consultant psychiatrist, we're not good at picking up people, and we're supposed to be the experts, who have neurodevelopmental problems. And I see this in A&E the whole time, children who come in who are self-harming, and there's a concern that they're becoming so-called personality disorders, and we're not sitting back and saying, hold on a second, what's going on here? And it's going back to what you asked about ask them what's bothering them, and they tell you it's sound, it's somatosensory, it's smell, as well as their mum annoying them or they're annoying them, and they're impulsive. and we're not asking those questions. And it's I just think this is great because we can move forward, but all of us, and including the idea of the so-called hierarchy that the CAM services have an expertise, they may not, and we need to look at that as regards training as well. The psychiatrists were training that we look at neurodevelopmental, neuroatypical, because particularly when you go into adult psychiatry, it is not part of training at all. And it is in child, but not that much, and I think we need to do something. Thank you.
Was there one other question? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Paul Bradley. I'm background in acquired brain injury, particularly in cognitive communication disorders. And I think some of the silent kind of epidemic information is coming through now is that between 37 and 89% of inmates in the US and Australia have had at least one traumatic brain injury. And then with that we now know that up to 83% of people with traumatic brain injury have cognitive communication difficulties. And now what we're learning more as well is that with our kiddies, and so many of them are not diagnosed at all, like how any of us survive to adulthood without a significant bang in the head, and again you have a bang in the head without a brain injury, but that actually gets cognitive stalls. So what's happening is during primary school they're not being picked up because there's no problem, and they're developmentally normal for the age that they are, and then they're coming up to 13 for the transition period of primary to secondary school, and suddenly these difficulties, organisational skills are needed, and also that kind of regulation, peer, looking more towards peer social interaction versus older person, where older person work really well perhaps all through primary school, and then suddenly all this huge spectrum of difficulties are coming up that are not being caught, are not being seen as going back to, oh God, yeah, do you remember he had a bang in the head when he was 3, or he was 5, or he was 6. And I remember recently a friend who was doing rehabilitation training, and she actually said to a group of young men who were attending for that kind of cognitive communication difficulties where they were missing information, where they did that dysregulation and emotional, they were just saying, she was just saying to them, look, I need to warn you that if you've one traumatic brain injury, the chance of having a second one are 3 times as great, and the chance of a third one is 8 times as great. And they all started laughing. And she said, this isn't funny, this is for real. And they said, well, one fellow said, well, I've had 5. Another fellow said, well, I've had 3. And it's like, as part of the sensory difficulties and the original difficulties that they had, the vulnerability going up and up and up. And I think the stats that are now saying that up to 89% of inmates have had at least one traumatic brain injury, particularly, again, with domestic violence, women are not coming forward saying they got banged in the head with a frying pan. They got knocked against the wall. There are actually significant brain injuries now not being missed across both from perpetrators and victims as well. And I think for me it's missing that's not up there as very much part of the autism and with the ADHD and with the learning difficulties, that in fact the silent epidemic of our time are these traumatic brain injuries that either again from loss of looking good, perhaps no loss of consciousness. We know now that CT scans and MRIs will not show up on that brain injury, and that multiple concussions likewise. So it's like this is a whole other area that perhaps is getting missed. And I absolutely love the idea that this is for every citizen in Wales. As Dame Bailey was saying, but it's for every citizen. When I do family work, all they say to me is, you need to let every guard know about this. You need to let every shopkeeper know about this, and you need to let every bus driver know about it. And again, it's about the symptom that it is about. When it becomes ownership in the public, then it's like, well, what are the problems? It's not about becoming less brain injured or less autistic or less ADHD. It's about how do we manage who I am with what is expected of me, and are the well-being and mental health issues arising because we want to normalise. It's like looking at, well, what are we looking at here? What are the parameters we're looking at? Are we looking at your strengths and therefore your well-being and being guided towards that? Or are we looking to getting you normalised, integrated, included? Are we really clear in our definitions of what are we putting on people? And therefore, and then what impact is that on terms of being different, being wrong, being loss of face, being stupid? You know, it's like the story of the loser, story that often they're telling themselves because nobody's given them the information around the background. I'm going to stop now because it's like, sorry.
I think we're just time there now. Perhaps if there's any closing comments for anyone on the panel, maybe you say before we finish? No? Okay. So thank you very much for being so involved in the discussion. It's been really interesting to hear, and maybe sort of grab emails I'm certainly intending to do so, and stay in touch. Okay, thank you. So I think more is going to come up.